When you start sewing, your machine can look a bit intimidating, but it doesn't have to be that way. And once you know, everything's going to be easy peasy and you won't stop sewing. So if you're starting, stay with me because this is going to solve a few doubts. They don't seem like they do a lot, but these affordable sewing machines can work really well, not only with mending and with things for the house, but also with things you want to create for yourself, and even work with upholsteries and plastic. They work really well. So don't doubt it and get one of the cheap ones to start with. And even though they are different, they have some differences. I have an Alpha and a Singer brand. They are basically the same, and with the instructions manual you won't be lost. So you don't need a really expensive sewing machine to sew a lot. At the end of the video I leave you a link, as well as in the description box down below, with all the things related to the sewing machine, all the different stitches and press of foot and things like that. So consider subscribing if you like this kind of content. I would really appreciate it. It helps the channel a lot, and that way you don't miss anything. And to start sewing you need some thread, of course, and you need a bobbin. You not only need one thread, you need something to go underneath to mimic the movement of your hand. When you start sewing, you do this movement to join the two fabrics together, and that's what you need. You need some thread underneath that holds everything together. This machine has it up here, but for example the other one does the same, but you need to pull the side as well. So we're going to thread the bobbin through the little hole it has so it doesn't move, and follow the arrows. And with this bobbin already threaded, what we're going to do is to put it in here. We're going to pull to the side this bit, which has a little opening here, and in here they usually bring all your oil and things to take care of the machines, the screwdrivers and things like that, which is really useful. I have it outside. And then we're going to push down this little door open and take the bobbin case out. With this little lever we're going to pull and it's out. And once we have our bobbin threaded, we're going to place it inside the bobbin case. Sometimes some machines have them up here, but in my case it's down here. It doesn't matter, you just follow the instructions and everything will be okay. So to put it inside the bobbin case, it has to be not clockwise, but the other way around, making like a P if you want to look for a shape. And then we are going to leave it as it is, open, so we can pull it out once we have the machine threaded. That way we avoid knots and any winding that goes wrong. And one thing that's really interesting is the bobbin tension, because we sometimes don't pay attention to it, and it's really important. The tension needs to be enough for the thread to go through, but not to run like crazy. So if we see it a bit loose, we have this little screw here to tighten, and that way it allows us to hold the bobbin in place and don't let it run like crazy. We have to be able to hold the bobbin by the thread and let it go little by little if we give little strikes. And now to thread the machine, we're going to do the same. Follow the arrows, follow the numbers, and everything will be okay. It's quite easy because you just have to follow, and in case you need it to come up, you can just move it a little bit so it's easier. And one step that's really important is that in front of the machine there's a little bit where the thread has to go behind, so to avoid, everything is to avoid knots and threading it properly. So and then in the needle we have to thread it from front to back, and once we have it there we have to keep our thread by hand and put the needle down. This way the needle goes down and the thread travels looking for the other thread and pulling it out of the machine. So once we have them both here, we're going to put them through the presser foot and back. Again, to avoid any knots and to thread it properly. And now that we have our thread out, we're going to place it inside the presser foot and back. And once you have your machine threaded, you can go ahead and have a look at all the rest of the levers and little things you have around. For example, the stitch you want. The stitches are, this one brings a lot. It brings as well decorative stitches I have never used, and the other one, my alpha one, doesn't as much. But they are all useful. So you have your normal stitch, then you have one where the needle moves a little bit to the right, which is useful if you want to sew something a bit more on the edge. And then you have your zigzag stitch and the zigzag that comes between lines. It comes in 3 different lines, which is really good for stretchy materials. And then you have different stitches that are useful, for example, for invisible stitches, invisible seams, as well as fake serger finish as well. This one is useful. And then of course your buttonholes. The buttonholes one are really easy because again you have numbers there, so you just have to follow the instructions. So these are really useful to have. And then of course the length one. The length I always sew with a 3 to 4 size length, I mean a longer stitch, because sometimes it's easier, because if you choose a narrower length, a shorter stitch, the holes are going to be really close, so you have the risk of ripping your fabric because you have too many holes all at once. So I always choose 3 to 4 length, but the narrower ones are good even with zigzag stitch, because it lifts the zigzag stitch really short and really together, so it's nice to have in different finishes. And then we have the subject of tensions. It's really complicated for me to advise when people ask me what tension should I use with this sort of fabric. It depends, because any sort of fabric has many different types. So it depends. I always have a middle tension, a number 4, and what I do is I try the fabric I'm going to sew. So in a little corner, or after I've cut, in a little scrap, I try my tension before I start sewing. That way I can be sure of what I'm doing, if it's going to gather the fabric a little bit, if it's too tight or too loose. That way you know, because it's quite complicated just to say with this fabric you need this tension, because it's the same as every oven. It's different. This is sort of the same. And when you're going to start sewing, have a look at the little plate the machine has here on top, because it has engraved some lines with different widths, not only for different, for example, hemlines, if you want a wider hemline, but it helps you keep straight, which is really helpful. And back here behind the machine you have 2 different levers. One makes possible for the presser foot to go down, so it presses the fabric and you can sew with it. And then the other one, a little one, narrower and closer to the presser foot, releases it. And that way you can change it, and you can change it depending on the fabric you're going to sew. And when you start sewing, you need to secure this first stitch. If you don't, the seam is going to open and it's going to lose everything you've worked on. So for that, you have the reverse lever, and by pressing it, the machine goes backwards, and that allows it to make like a knot that you would by hand, and it secures this seam. My other machine, the Alpha one, has it on the side, but it doesn't really matter. Once you start sewing with your machine, you get used to where the things are and you won't have any problems. And once you finish sewing, maybe you realize that the machine is a bit stuck, but by moving this, you get rid of it. And then every machine has a little knife here to get rid of your excess thread and to cut it really, so you don't have to be looking for scissors or anything like that. I use it a lot, even though I have little scissors, but it's really useful. As I said, these sewing machines are really useful to have at home. You can do mending, you can do things for the house, and not only that, you can create things from scratch. The only thing I have problems with is some stretchy materials. It doesn't sew them very well, or if I have too many layers of a thicker fabric like a leather or faux leather. It happened to me once that I had a handbag, and with the handle and the handbag it didn't do well, but the rest, it can sew denim, it can sew even corduroy, so it's really good. It's a nice machine, and once you get the hang of all the little levers and things you have on yours, you won't have any problems at all. They are easy to use and to store, so go ahead and don't hesitate, just get some sewing done. And if you like this kind of content, consider subscribing, because I upload twice a week, and that way you won't miss anything. And I'll leave you here a link to everything about the sewing machine, all the different presser foot and loads of stuff. Have a look. Bye!